when they find out that I've got a connection to the local rock and roll scene in my city, specifically the punk rockers and the hardcore community. And if you don't understand what that means, just it's all rock and roll. It's just the rock crowds have ways of distinguishing themselves, just like rap. You know, you got the rappers like, yo, this is the real hip hop. That other fake mainstream stuff, that's not real. We got the realness. This is me in 2007. This is the singer of Government Warning. He's from my city. Government Warning is the biggest band in my city. That's me right there screaming. You know, I used to go state to state. You know, for the first time in my life, I traveled to other states in the bus of this band. And this is the only other black guy that used to hang out with me. And I was 16 years old. And what happened is I got linked up with the band. They liked me because I had the connections with the drugs, because I was from the hood. And I would get on their bus or their little van. Back then, they didn't have Sprinter vans. They had big, ugly Astro vans. And I would go state to state with them and just go to shows at 16. And I always look back at that period of my life as being really, really weird, because I kind of like, you got to understand something about me. I come from the hood. My house, in my old neighborhood, I had a gate in the backyard. And that was the cut. There was an apartment complex directly behind my house. So my house had like a brown gate, a regular gate, and it had these, and you could like put your foot on it, and you could like, it was easy to climb over it because it had these little sections where you could put your foot in. And right behind that gate was an apartment complex that was very, very ghetto. So that was like the cut through. If you didn't want to walk around the street and take a 10-minute walk, you could go behind my house, hop the gate, and be in the back of the apartment complex, and you know, that was like a thoroughfare. So my house had a lot of activity back then. And this is in the 90s. You know, to set the scene for you, this is like when Master P was popular and stuff like that. Cash Money, you know, 90s, late 90s. PlayStation 1, Game Boy Color, stuff like that, right? And at that point in my life, I was a kid. And I experienced a lot of death. Not firsthand, not in my family, but I had an older brother, and he's 8 years older than me. So when I'm 10, he's 18. And his friends would hang out at my house, and I would get to know people because, like I said, my house is where the cut through was to get back and forth from this apartment complex to the subdivision, the neighborhood, right? Really, really ghetto apartment complex. I remember I was smoking Black and Milds, and I was like 8, hiding inside of a playground, smoking Black and Milds with my friends. It was just so ghetto, very ghetto, extremely ghetto. You got to keep that in mind, right? So I'm in that environment, vicariously seeing how the street life is through my brother. His friends die, and I go to their funerals with him. I didn't know what I was doing. I'm 8, 9 years old, but I'm internalizing all of this and absorbing all of this. So fast forward to high school. I'm 16, 17. I liked skateboarding. I got into skateboarding for some reason. It all started with BMXing. I liked BMX bikes. I liked the way they look. I liked them when I was a kid. And BMXing led me to skateboarding. And when I got into that, I started meeting white people. Now, there was a kid named Jesse that went to my high school. And we became friends because we both had on Vans, right? It was 2007. And he was hooked up with this band. He knew this band because they came from his neighborhood in the suburbs. Long story short, he told me, hey, you need to come to this rock show downtown at a bar. And that night, I had my first beer. Jesse introduces me to a guy named Rob. And Rob introduces me to a guy named Kirkland. And these guys are teenagers that all live in Jesse's neighborhood, which is the nice part of town, suburbs, rich parents, rich area. They go to a school called Clover Hill. I go to a school called George Wythe. You know, yeah, if you know about the inner city, you know the suburban schools have different names, more proper sounding names. So Jesse brings me into this world of rock, punk rock. And punk rock people have this ethos that I related to. They didn't like the mainstream version of rock. They hated people that liked heavy metal. They hated any other form of music in rock except punk. And they thought that if you became successful, you were a sellout. And at that particular point in my life, I kind of liked that rebellious attitude, and they were interesting. It was like zoo animals. I'm like, man, all of these white people, they're like weird. And this guy, he had a tattoo of a 40 ounce right here. He had a tattoo of like a 40 ounce. Forgot the brand, but he had like a 40. It was Hurricane. He had a Hurricane bottle right here, and his name was Matty G. And it was people like him, Matty G. There was a guy named Tony Bitch. And it was like these weird white guys that were getting high, getting drunk off cheap beer. And it was like, they were like animals. And it was so strange for me to witness. And they accepted me, you know. But that first day I go to the concert is to this band, Government Warning. I go to the concert. And like I said, Jesse introduces me to Robbie. Robbie has a friend named Kirkland. When I meet Kirkland, we walk to, after, the show was going on. It's a bunch of bands playing before Government Warning comes on, right? The opening bands. And it's inside a bar. And the bar is like the size of this room. Little place. It was like $2 to get in. I mean, it sounded terrible sound quality-wise, but it was a subculture. It was a genuine community. And they would have shows at houses. Wherever you could have a show, they would have one. They would have one in the phone booth if they could. But while we're waiting on Government Warning to play, the main band, we go to this bar, this sushi bar. And this kid, Kirkland, is working behind the bar, and he was only 17. And I thought that was weird. And I had never drank alcohol a day in my life. So they're like, hey, you want a beer? And I'm like, I don't have any money. And they were like, you can drink for free. Kirkland's going to hook us up. We meet Kirkland. I remember it like it was yesterday. He gives me a Budweiser. I drank the Budweiser fast, and I got drunk off one beer. And we went back. We seen the band. And from that day on, I hung out with these guys for like 2-3 years. And it was my first time really meeting white people. And I don't know. I mean, I liked it because it was different, and I've always been the kind of kid that was into different things. I love rap, love hip hop, love the neighborhood, but I also like to explore different things. And I think they liked me because I was their link to the ghetto, and I was their link to drugs. Because they, while they embraced me and took me into their community, I could take them to get all the drugs in the world because I'm from the hood and I know all the drug dealers because I grew up with them. So it was this very strange dichotomy. It only lasted for a couple of years. At a certain point, I stopped hanging out with these people because I just kind of thought they were sellouts and fakes themselves, because they had this attitude that they were punk rockers because they didn't believe in the mainstream. They had these anti-establishment beliefs. They were very liberal. But in reality, once they turned 20, they would go to college. It was like a phase that they would go through, and then eventually they would go to college. They all came from really, really rich households, great families, and it just seemed to me like it was just angst. Some of these guys are still doing the same old thing. This was back in 2007, and some of these guys I see every now and then, and they're still up to the same old thing, still playing in bands, and that's just what they're going to do forever. But a lot of these guys, at a certain point, I was like, all right, you guys created this punk rock community as an alternative to the mainstream, and it was awesome. Bands from all over the country, all over the world would come to our city, and it was like a touring circuit, but it was underground. Like Monday, a band from Sweden might be on tour, and they're gonna come to a house in the west end of town, like in the basement of the house. The next day, a couple of local bands like Government Warning might be playing, with a band from New York that's coming. The next day we might all hop in a van. Government Warning has to do a few shows in Connecticut, or Connecticut, Delaware, Massachusetts. We hop in a van. We follow them to the shows. We stay at squat houses. And it was like this really esoteric, eclectic mix of people that really were about the artistry, and it was all about the DIY ethic, the do-it-yourself ethic. But at a certain point, I started to realize all of you guys come from the suburbs. All of you guys have wealthy families, so you can afford to be this anti-establishment punk rocker. I'm poor. I come from poverty. I'm real. I have a reason to be this way. You guys are just going through this. I mean, I just got to a point where I just thought it was all like fake. But I really learned a lot from that time period. Like I said, I had my first beer, got drunk for the first time, and the guy Kirkland who gave me the beer at the bar, he was actually related to the Kirkland toilet paper family. If you ever been in the grocery store, there's a brand called Kirkland. That was his family, and he was rich. And when I started meeting these guys' families, I'm going to end with this. This white guy named Robbie. Jesse introduced me to Robbie. Robbie introduced me to Kirkland. Those were the three main people, and they hooked me up with the band, the local bands, and I got to know everybody. But Robbie's parents, I stayed over his house one night, and his parents shocked me. Like, they offered me drugs and weed, and I'm 16, and I was like, it just really gave me some insight into white people's families. And when he seen where I lived at, he was like, "You live in a hood," and I'm like, "This is what you consider the hood?" I mean, I lived in a house at that time, and it wasn't the hood. It was a nice neighborhood. The hood was behind the house, but it was like a regular apartment complex that just had hood people in it. It really wasn't the hood per se. Like, to me, the hood is the projects, the areas of town that look, sketchy. Where we lived at was a pretty good part of town. It was just, we had an apartment complex, and apartment complexes sometimes have rowdy people. But it wasn't the ghetto. It just was like, it had ghetto people, but it wasn't really the ghetto. We made it ghetto, but it wasn't really ghetto. To me, the projects is the ghetto. In the neighborhoods that are around the projects. You got the projects, you got houses right by the projects. That's the ghetto. My neighborhood was just a regular middle-class neighborhood. It just had ghetto kids in it. But it shocked me, because I'm like, you really think this is the ghetto? I was like, if you've seen the real ghetto, you probably it'll really blow your mind. And it was just a unique experience. I mean, I really can go into a lot more detail about this, but it was just a great point. It was the point in time of my life where I got to learn a lot about white people. And I hate to phrase it that way, but that's the truth. And I just learned so much about them, and I carry those lessons with me to this day. And I might go into detail about some stories, because, like I said, I've been all over the United States with these bands from my city. Got to see a lot. I mean, at this point in time, I learned that white people, when they get drunk, they do stupid stuff. Like, Robbie used to get drunk, strip naked, and just break out cars. We'll be downtown, and it'll be these cars parallel parked, and he'd bust out all the windows and run back to the suburbs the next day. And, that's why I kind of distanced myself from them, because I was like, you guys are fake. And this is not a real movement, It could be a real movement, but it's not. You guys come here into the city, destroy, then run back to the suburbs, then eventually you guys go to college, and this is just a phase. This isn't really real. But peace.